So you can just leave that here for now.
You want to take this on? I wouldn't take this. I'd take that with me
Yeah,
if I was
it's
you.
for tomorrow morning, so I don't
You want
need
to take
it.
it on there? You're fine. But yeah, so that works.
Okay,
All right.
yeah, no one's gonna be in here, so. Thank you.
I have it on my computer, but do you have a hard copy of the agenda?
Good afternoon, everyone. We will call the Coronavirus Ad Hoc Committee meeting for June the 27th, 2023 to order at this time. Ms. Carrillo, if you will, call the roll.
Brenham, Barron,
Here.
Newton.
Present.
We have a quorum.
And for the record, Mr. Branham did notify me and let me know that he would be running a little bit late to this meeting. Next order of business is the minutes, approval of minutes from June the 1st. You can find those items on pages 5 through 8. I'll entertain a motion if we do not have any changes.
Move to approve?
Second. Ms. Carrillo? Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Next order of business is the adoption of the agenda. Mr. Brown, or to our clerk's office, do we have any modifications to our agenda?
I've received no request.
None from here either.
I'll entertain a motion to accept the agenda.
Madam Chair, I'm not sure if this requires an amendment, well, never mind. Well, yes, a motion to change the agenda or not. But Mr. Wright, looking at the order of the items under 4A, I am going to recuse myself from item 4A1. And with Mr. Branham not being here, it would probably be better to make that the last item on our agenda today, or at least the second one when he comes. Does that require amending the agenda, or can we just skip that item until we have a quorum on it?
Yes, Madam Chair. The chair can, once you get to 4A, the chair can take it in whatever order that the chair deems appropriate.
Perfect. Move to approve?
Second. Ms. Carrillo?
Barron,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Next order of business are items for discussion/action. And this is 4A, American Rescue Plan application review and recommendations. Before we turn it over to the administration, as we have done for several meetings, we have been discussing the applications that have been presented to us by our third party. These applicants have submitted all the documentation thus far needed and have gone through several layers of I'm not going to say scrutiny, but several layers of just making sure that they are rightly before us and that they're in line with the American Rescue Plan application and as the intent of this body. So we are down to the last three. We do have one other category that we will take up separately. But I want to make sure that as we move forward in this discussion, just having some conversation with some of my colleagues to note that this is when we started this process, our heart was in the right place. Our heart's still in the right place. And it is to make sure that dollars get out to the community. I've spoken to many community members, and they're concerned about the length of time that we've taken to go through these items, but we wanted to make sure that we have a transparent process and that we set every organization that is to be funded up for success. And as we're setting them up for success, what I mean by that is that we're doing our due diligence. And in doing our due diligence, we're making sure that we're not placing any major liability on the county by us funding these organizations. I know that many of them are really at crunch time as it relates to their budget. And so that's why we really want to go ahead and make today's meeting and do some recommendations that go before full council. So before I turn it over to administration to somewhat gather us, and we'll lead our conversation, but to be here for any questions, I do want to recognize Mr. Livingston and Ms. Teresa, who are here with us in chambers. So with that, before we start this conversation, I do want to turn it over to Mr. Brown and his team if there's anything that you would like to share with us as we begin this dialogue.
Madam Chair, if you would recognize Assistant County Administrator Lori Thomas, who's been very integral in this process, I would appreciate it.
You recognize Ms. Thomas, and as I've done at every meeting, I will just continue to say thank you for your hard work and for your diligence through this process. It's greatly appreciated for guiding us through and keeping us on point and on task and providing us with all the information that we need to make an informed decision. You recognize Ms. Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really have nothing to add. I just thought that I would help you to sort of begin walking through this process since we're beginning with educational assistance. If you have your large binder, this topic is covered on page 103 there. I will tell you that in the beginning of this, we had recommendations from the third party of $1,057,422. Since that time, very recently, Riverbanks Society has withdrawn their application for $125,000 for renovating their farm classroom and expanding it. So that now brings this category down to $932,422. To refresh your memory on that, the groups that are recommended or were found to be those that should be considered are the Richland County Public Library Education Studio, helping young readers with learning loss for $64,500. The Lower Richland Alumni Foundation for the Education Assistance Project of the Lower Richland Alumni Foundation for $155,932. Lynn Brown Inspires Young CEO and Leaders of Tomorrow for Young CEOs and Leaders of Tomorrow, $50,000. SC Thrive for Connecting Richland County Schools to Mental Health First Aid for $179,740. Planned Parenthood South Atlantic for Comprehensive Sex Education in Richland County for $100,000. United Way of the Midlands for Midlands Reading Consortium for $200,000. And Boys and Girl Clubs of the Midland Project Learn with Certified Teachers for $182,250. All applications for these groups can be found just beyond this coverage on page 103.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. So before I open up the discussion, if you will please, of the ones that are listed here before us, have any of these other organizations already been funded in another category?
Richland County Public Library has already been funded in another category. I don't believe any of the others have yet been funded.
Thank you. And then one additional question. The Riverbank Society with the farm classroom, did they just withdrew? Any reason
No, ma'am.
for? Okay, just curious.
No, ma'am.
Okay. All right, so with that, I will open up the discussion for the applications. Ms. Newton, you're recognized.
Thank you. So I'm trying to structure my questions appropriately. I know that is helpful. So, Ms. Thomas, we've talked about the desk review process a few times, and I still think that I might be making some assumptions about the process. And so I would love it if you would, just for my benefit, the benefit of the citizens, remind us what happens or what will happen after the county recommends an organization for award. So I'm curious in general, but also specifically, I know there are difference of opinions among the body about whether we approve all of the applicants who reach these scores or whether we make determinations, additional determinations about capacity, et cetera. But one thing that did concern me as I continue to look through the applications again is that everyone outlined a timeline and a body of work for a particular time frame. And unfortunately, we are behind schedule in terms of when we were awarding it. So there might be an organization that said, you know, this is a single calendar year program and it's going to run calendar year 23. Well, we're already in month 6, almost month 7 of 23. So I would be curious to know generally if you could refresh us again on the desk review process and also how the desk review process will take into consideration, if at all, the remaining timelines from what people have proposed.
Madam Chair, if I may, I'll be happy to try and answer the question, and if I don't get it specifically, please feel free to just let me know. The desk review process is actually one that begins following the award. At that time, they will review they will get more in depth into the project with the actual applicants. They will be asking for more information, more documentation. They'll be asking about their processes and procedures for actually monitoring and receiving the grants, for actually procuring services, things of those natures. Based upon that, they will then assign them a risk category for us and recommend monitoring for the groups. Thus far, we've, and this would be reported later, we have 7 desk reviews back, and all have been found to be low risk with a recommendation for monitoring, which those that require the least amount of monitoring, the county may be doing some of those internally. However, we will also have our third-party vendor involved with helping to be sure that the applicants or the award, the grantees receive help to make sure that they stay in compliance and are able to provide all the documentation that's necessary, and to ensure that they don't incur costs that at a later time they may find that are not reimbursable. As to timeline, these funds, if you go back to ARPA's been around now for quite a while, back to 2021. These particular funds can be used retroactively to the 23 if the groups actually began the projects without county funds. Perhaps they had some way that they were able to begin those processes, and they could potentially ask for reimbursement for those expenditures if they have been done in collaboration and in compliance with all federal requirements. Otherwise, it may be found that if they've not, simply because of the regulations that we have regarding obligating, they may be only able to do a 1-year project or program. If they did that, of course, that may require less money, and there may be additional funds that in the will of the body, with the last vote of the body, might be unused and would be able to be reobligated to the DSS facility.
Thank you. May I continue? And so with the desk review, you're going to be looking from a compliance perspective, making sure that the things that they've proposed are applicable under the law and determining monitoring, et cetera. Do you make any additional determinations in terms of capacity to do the work, or from your perspective, has everyone that has made it to the list been deemed to have capacity to do what they have asked?
They will look at capacity as well, and that is part of what gets assigned during the risk assessment for monitoring. If it's determined during the scope of moving forward with the work, they may be classified as a high risk, and we would be made notified of that.
Thank you. And two more questions, if I may. And so then when you're looking at the desk review, I forgot one of the questions, so you'll just get one. One of the things that we had talked about before was potentially having a cushion of funds in case there was any clawback, because these are, if we reimburse something that then isn't allowed by ARPA, then the county is on the hook for that. How do you see that playing out? And I guess, too, I'm thinking in light of the motion that unused funds go to to the Family Services Center, is there something else that we need to do to ensure that we have that flexibility, that we're not out of pocket if that circumstance should happen?
While I haven't specifically asked that question, from a simple process of timing and the regulations provided by the law and by U.S. Treasury, if we do not use funds or obligate funds from us or as a county as a whole by December 31st, 2024, and then expend them by December 31st, 2026, we would have to return those funds. So I'm not sure we can build a cushion, because if it's not obligated by December 31st, 2024,
Gotcha.
you really could not just set money aside. You're not allowed to set them aside for rainy day funds.
Understood. And then my last question, I remembered my other question, also on the desk review. Again, I understand that we're looking at compliance. Are we also looking at outcomes as we do our monitoring process, or is it only compliance with the federal guideline?
In compliance, to be compliant, they would actually have to respond on their outcomes, just as if it were another federal program, say CDGB. So they would have to actually give us the information on their outcomes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Questions from any of our other colleagues that are present? So with that, if no more questions, I'll entertain a motion. I'll make a motion. And so my motion would be to fund applicants listed, the Richland County Public Library, Laura Richland Alumni Foundation, Lynn Brown Inspires Young CEOs and Leaders of Tomorrow, SC Thrives, Planned Parenthood South Atlantic, United Way of the Midlands, and the Boys and Girls Clubs of the Midlands for the amounts that they have requested, up to those amounts, and also pending any any modifications needed during the desk review.
I will second that motion.
In a category, or are you just going to those?
I listed all of those. I listed them because we had one that had withdrawn their application. So I just went ahead and listed each one of them. That would include the entire, all of the applicants, with the exception of the Riverbank Society, who have withdrawn their application.
Mr. Livingston, that category is education assistance.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. I wasn't certain.
Category, yeah, I want to make sure.
Oh, I apologize. I didn't understand your question. So yes, we're specifically talking about education assistance. Any further discussion? If not, we will take a vote. Ms. Carrillo? Second it?
Did I?
Second it?
Yeah.
She did. She did. Ms. Carrillo, don't prolong this.
Yeah, don't, because I'll change.
Don't do it.
Barron?
Yes.
Newton?
Yes.
Motion approved.
All right, one more funded. Okay, so let's go to food insecurities. And Ms. Thomas, you want to give us an update? here, maybe you'll have some to help us get this number down to a comfortable number.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Ms. Barron. With food insecurity, if you recall, we actually allocated $2 million toward this group. We actually have already funded senior resources for the FY 22-23 year for $548,046. With that remaining, the groups that have applied are Palmetto AIDS Life Support Services for the PALS items for food and security, $58,256. Senior meals for senior resources for the FY 23-24 year or part of the 24 year, FY 24 and part of 25, $822,069. MHA Food Insecurity Midlands Housing Alliance for $451,800. Physicians Fighting Food Insecurity from Prisma Health Midlands, $380,003. Serve and Connect for Greg's Groceries in Richland County, $77,500. The Nurturing Center for Community Impact Projects, $150,000.
And Ms. Thomas, will you give me that number again, where we sit?
Yes, ma'am. Eligible for allocation currently is $1,451,954.
And this was a $2 million category.
That's correct.
Okay. Discussion.
The question is, so we have enough funds to fund all of them?
No, ma'am. No, sir.
So wait, no, that's not, okay, maybe I wasn't clear.
No, we do not. So you have 1 million of the remaining applicants come to a total of, just one second, I'll tell you what that is. Let me go back one page, I'm sorry. The remaining applicants qualify, the qualified recommendations currently are $939,628. Your available allocation is $1,451,954, meaning that we need to find a way to reduce the request by $487,674.
Okay, so that's, because that was my question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
When I said, was this a $2 million category that we set aside $2 million, and we've already awarded roughly $500,000.
Yes, ma'am.
For the 22-23 fiscal year.
That's correct.
Okay, so
I just want her to repeat that number.
Let me try to repeat them all. The remaining qualified recommendations are $1,939,628. The available funding remaining in the grants is $1,451,954, meaning that we are we have a request exceeding available allocations of $487,674.
this definitely is going to need some conversation. And this is the one that, I've just kind of been going over in my head about, because there are some significant organizations that do great work in our community. I was talking to someone earlier today, and I was saying there are certain organizations, if they don't exist in our community, we would know that they didn't exist. And so as we start this conversation about how we fund, I want us to keep in mind, I know that this is not about who's your favorite. This is about who's needed, who has the impact. And so I would, as I've done before, we've had some conversation about this category. We initially had it. And I want to be real clear that we see senior resources on here twice, but we're talking about two different budget years. There's two different budget years, and so, yeah, I'll just say that. Just make sure that we know that one is for 2022, 23, and one is for 24, 25, which is where we're going.
Actually, it's for 23, 24, and then half of
Okay.
24, 25.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the clarification.
I mean,
So, open for discussion. Ms. Newton?
I have a question about the nurturing centers proposal. And I know that this has been reviewed by our consultant, and I know that it's also going to have a desk review. If I read this correctly, a lot of the things in this grant are actually related to transportation. And so I guess I'll just pause there and say, is that interpretation correct? And if so, how does that fit in terms of this category and also the guidelines from ARPA?
just one moment, I'm trying to
In
read
my
through.
book, actually, this doesn't have a page number, so I can't tell you. Oh, maybe it's hidden. Maybe 189.
199, I believe. 189 or 199. I had to insert some
Well, I don't have
pages.
on glasses. It looks like an 8 to me, but I'm open to a 9.
It does have quite a lot in the budget relative to auto expense. That was noted by our consultant.
That's what, 100?
So I know you have another question, but I just want to insert here, if I may. So Ms. Thomas, I know we had discussion in other categories about the purchase of automobiles and debt elimination and those types of things. My concern is that if it's already noted that there is a high, in the notes it says a high amount of auto expense, do we not know what that is? Because we know in past conversations that we've already dismissed portions of applicants or their application because that was not an allowable cost. Can we factor that in at this point?
The purchase of vehicles was something that was recommended to be redlined. However, this is auto expense. This may be things like gas, mileage, things of that nature. So while it's not a red line item, that's where, according to our review, there was a considerable investment. It does, I believe, to Ms. Newton's question, this is relative to deliveries of, I think the reason that it fell into this category was it's in the delivery of what looks like it's food. Mhm.
Let me, Ms. Newton, the administrator would like to be recognized, and then because we do need to have that, continue this conversation.
Just very briefly, Madam Chair, members of the committee, I think what you're asking is, when you consider this, what other factors that you have, and what you've talked about in a number of your grants is that you want to feel as though the value of the finances that you're providing are hitting the targeted service. And it sounds like you have a question as to whether or not the value of the transportation portion of the expenditure is significant enough to overcome your concerns about the actual part, which they talk about the food insecurity that they're trying to address. So I just wanted to say to you, you can consider any of those things. While those are federal guidelines, these are county grant funds that are fully within your discretion to decide how you will consider them, as long as you, again, stay within the ARPA bounds. So you don't have a limitation as to what you can consider to be of most importance to you as a body.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Ms. Newton, please continue.
No, I think that's my question there. Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Recognize.
If I may, if you all would like to refresh yourselves on this one, page, I believe it's 202, there's a budget narrative there that gets a little more specific.
And so I'm glad you brought that up because that's where I am. And it is quite confusing. I have lots of little notes on this section because there is one that says vehicle expenses. And it lists things like the maintenance repairs from FY '22 to include oil changes, fuel, to and from clients, all those things, tires and such. Then additional expenses of $3,500 almost could be redundant, which is concerning to me. And I'm going to phrase this in a question, and so I don't get caught on a tangent. Is there what would be the recommendation if we're looking at this budget? I'm uncomfortable with the $43,000 being given for transportation and maintenance of a vehicle. That I'm not certain if 100% of that vehicle is being used for this project. And so is there a recommendation as to how we could look at making adjustments to this amount?
That would be up to, okay.
Madam Chair. I think that, what they request, you don't have to fund everything they request. You can pick out the things you think that, okay, this is appropriate and fund that. So just because, say, if there's $150,000 that's asked or requested, you don't have to fund the entire amount. You can pick, say, well, these are the things that we think are appropriate for us to fund and fund those. So you can do it that way.
Okay, and so that's clear to me because I'm going back, and as I look at the narrative and the different questions, it's apparent to me that this organization transports regularly for other things, and so I think that it is not the county would not be being good stewards of the funds to fund 100% of this transportation piece because it's not solely being used for this project. And so as with any other grant, you have to say a percentage of time, just like they've allocated their staffing. They've allocated their staffing, and we're not absorbing their entire salaries for their staff. So why would we absorb everything for their transportation? That's a rhetorical question. Ms. Newton, I saw you earlier.
Oh. So my question as it relates to the grant is, hypothetically, let's say that Richland County funded part of the request, but not the whole request. If there was an organization that said, because you didn't fund the whole thing, we can't do this project at all, because they're inseparable, for example. In that scenario, they just wouldn't receive funding?
They do have the ability to refuse the grant.
Okay, thanks.
So to keep the conversation moving, we definitely have some feelings on one particular applicant. I would like to hear some feedback about some of the others that are listed here.
I'm working from my agenda for this meeting, and some of them doesn't have dollar amounts, and that's what we're talking about.
Yes, sir.
So, can you tell quickly, tell me, for example, the Middle Housing Alliance, I got it, thank you.
$451,800. Oh, you got it? Okay.
I'm good now, so I can.
Yes, sir. So I want to, I started talking about senior resources earlier. And so I think it's all, we oftentimes, when we have these conversations, we talk about what we don't like in the application or what we can live with, what we can't live without. And so as I stated earlier, I feel that Senior Resources is one of those organizations that, whereas I don't think that it is the county's responsibility to fully fund the whole 100% operation of Senior Resources, and I've been clear about that. But I do think that if we don't fund them and they don't, and they get a decrease in the funding, I'm concerned about the number of people that, or the elders in our community that will be missing meals. I had the opportunity for 2 years to go out and drive and deliver meals in my district. And both years, I went to the same houses. You know what that said? They depend on those meals. And so as we are making informed decisions about who we shouldn't fund, I don't want us to forget about those ones that are really important to us here in the community. There are other ones. Prisma Health, they provide services here in our community regularly. At this point, I think it's this body's decision that we know that we need to shave down the amount. So that's where my thought is now. How do we get to the $1.4 million? How do we get there? And making adjustments that appear to be fair and make sense and align with our goals, our objectives. We've wrapped our brain around the strategic plan for the county and aligning those projects there. And then most importantly, can it be connected to the guidance of ARPA funds? So that's where I would, kind of like to talk numbers at this point.
So I guess I have a question about Senior Resources. And when I went and looked again, I didn't see what I thought I saw. So the way that I read this application was that this was to expand existing services and not to fund existing services. And so can I have clarity on that? Because that makes a difference to me.
I do know that there's a representative in the
Yes.
audience. If you would like to hear from him, I can certainly.
I am open to that. I just want to be fair. I'm not sure what we've done in the past, and so I don't want to.
I'm not going to, we've not had people in the audience that we needed to ask questions to. I just want to make sure that we're in line with rules and it's appropriate.
I think I can respond to what this is.
Okay.
It's not an expansion.
Okay.
Keep in mind that this is a continuation of the services. If you take the funding value for the $548,000 for FY22, multiply that times 1.5, that's how you get back to your 822. So it's basically continuing the service for those people, to keep the numbers at the same level so that they're not decreased.
Okay. And so what we're looking at here is not one budget year, but 1.5 budget years.
Correct. The documentation that was submitted was for the FY24 fiscal year and June to December of the FY25 fiscal year.
Can you tell me
July,
what
I'm sorry.
the financial amount is for the 0.5?
Just one second. $274,023.
Thank you.
World, I would hear calculators going off like this.
You can hear it, I can turn on my tactile.
Yeah, so at this point, what I'm looking at are areas that we can really kind of shave away. And so this was a note that I had, Ms. Thomas. So because it's June, almost July, when we originally took these applications, applicants had a timeline that they were working under. And we are how many months behind our timeline? I'm trying to go somewhere with this.
Madam Chair, I'm not certain. I would say maybe 6.
Okay, so that's fair. I don't need an accurate number, because what I'm looking at is if the applicant had a budget that was based upon 12 months, and 6 of them have already gone away, could we then say we are funding from July 1, I'm just throwing a date out here, July 1 until, and looking at their budget and making those adjustments that way? I know it's kind of technical, because I'm talking out loud and thinking out loud and channeling my inner Lori Thomas, but I just probably they can, you said the payments can be retroactive if they can connect it, if they started.
They could be. The other thing to consider is that when the applications were opened, the guidelines that were given that they would need to be committed by June of 24 and expended by expended or substantially expended by October 31st, 2024. So they would have had until that time.
So there's really no loss of time, essentially. Is that what you're saying? Because as long as they spend the money by a particular date, then they're good?
Potentially.
I know it's a technical question, I know. Yeah. Okay. What you got, Mr. Livingston?
I just wanted to share your concern as relates to the council, senior resources, and just a little bit of history. There was a time when we had a council on aging in Richland County, Lacey County, different places, and the county funded that from those agencies broke up. Senior Resource became the council agency for dealing with seniors. So that's why we technically funded them. The time we funded them as our agency for aging. So that was, that is pretty much our agency in a sense in terms of history.
Yes, sir. I appreciate that.
I'm close. I just need
Close.
I need a little more time with my phone.
Okay, because I'm just going to continue to do my song and dance.
Well, I mean, here's what I'm thinking, which you may not agree with, but my motion would be.
Are you making a motion?
No,
or
I'm
you
telling.
you're just talking.
I'm thinking out loud.
Okay, I'm good with
as
that.
the song says, or I think that was dreaming. But anyway, so as I look at this list and I look at the amounts that people have asked for, and the fact that we are over currently by $487,674, and there may have been some cents in there, so my math might not be right. So for me, I would recommend funding most of these organizations at the levels that they have requested. What I would do as it relates to senior resources, which is no knock on the service they provide or the history, is I would take out that $274,000.23, which is the half of the other year, so that the funding that we provide is for a solid fiscal year, but not that next half, and they can do their funding and we can do our allocations on our budget year as usual. For me, I'm not going to recommend funds for the nurturing center. And when you do that, that comes to $424,046, if my math is right, which leaves a deficit of $63,628 that we have to find somewhere. And I think that when you look at the rest of the programs, the amounts, that's a little more of a dramatic amount for them. So I think that that's something that could either be shared and split the difference with the Midlands Housing Alliance or Physicians Fighting Food Insecurity, or potentially I would be willing to look at decreasing some of that funding for Physicians Fighting Food Insecurity, not because they don't do great work. I actually used to attend, that used to be my family practice, where I used to go see my doctor, but looking at them ramping up and starting a new program versus the Midlands Housing Alliance that has one where they really have the real costs. That's how I would look at making up that deficit. And since there's only two of us here for it to go forward with a recommendation, I'm looking at you before I finish doing my math here.
So I'm digesting it.
Okay.
And so my thought process is always, if we are going to do cuts, it needs to be justifiable across the board to all organizations. So if we're going to cut that half, or what is it, a half? Is a half a year?
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, other organizations aren't looking at a year and a half.
Okay, that's my question. So that's where I'm going with this.
Okay.
Are there other organizations that have submitted for a year and a half budget?
I can't say specifically because it wasn't spelled out in the applications. I can say that the timing to spend the money was the same.
Timing is the same. So because Senior Resources was very detailed in their application, we know specifically that they planned for a year and a half. Generally speaking, the other applicants essentially have a year and a half as well. Yes, sir.
I know you're looking for a framework or a methodology as you make your decision. I just want anyone that's also listening to this not to take what you're saying the wrong way. These grant dollars that you are choosing to give, that you did not have to give, whatever considerations, however you want to consider them, as long as they abide by the federal guidelines associated with ARPA, you can do. So there is no proportion, there is no synchronized amount, none of that. And I'm only saying that because I don't want anyone to come back to say to you all that, hey, you did not equally consider me, and get into all of that. So I just kind of want to share that. I know that's not where you were going, but I know when we get some of these phone calls, people may take that a little bit differently than I think you're intending. And you're talking about a framework or a method as you make your decision, so that when we speak to other applicants, we can give them some specificity. But ultimately, this is a grant. And as a grant provider, as the grantor, you hold the decision. Whether folks accept it or not is different, but you as the grantor have full sway within the bounds of the federal guidelines.
Thank you, Mr. Brown, because I do think that's very important for people to understand. I'm very systematic in my approach. So if someone did come to me, I want to be able to say, hey, we did this for every applicant, or we did this because of ... So I want to be able to explain that. And so I'm even of the opinion that if we are going to, and maybe, Ms. Thomas, let me just frame it in a question. Would we be non-compliant if we decided that we were only going to fund programs for 1 year, a year cycle. So we would give them 1 full year to expend their funds versus the 1.5 years that the guidance says you have up to.
I think I'm going to have to ask Sarah Harris on that, given that she's the grant person.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So the answer is yes. The county holds the discretion to release those funds and have them expended within the time frame that we establish. Certainly, there are things in the process, in the background with our county administration and our teams, excuse me, with how we work those things through, but we can certainly set a shorter timeline if necessary.
Okay. So with that, if we looked at a funding cycle that was for 1 year, is there a recommendation of the percentage that perhaps we could make adjustment? It could be percentage, it could be a number, that we could make adjustments on each applicant to keep that for consistency?
There certainly could be. I think the discretion, it may require further review in terms of how those, responsibilities are scaled back in that percentage range. But certainly we have a tremendous amount of nonprofit organizations that do this incredible work. But operationally, if we were to tie that date down a little bit more firm in 1 year's period, what would happen with our vendors, they would work in the background as well with that risk assessment process to determine whether or not they have the full range of capabilities to execute all the activities that they've outlined with their grant. It's complicated.
It is. It is.
It is. It's very complicated.
It is. So, okay. I'm trying to get to $400,000. That's it. So, and that's the hardest thing here, because we do have in this group, we have some applicants that are, definitely worthy of being funded. Just want to recognize Mr. Branham and Ms. Mackey, who have also joined us. We are discussing food insecurities. We have $1.4 million to award, and we have 1.9, which is requested. So we are just trying to make some adjustments to budgets to come up with a number here. Ms. Newton has made a recommendation to make adjustments to senior resources award by roughly about $200,000, give or take, because they presented a budget for 1.5 years. And she's also made a recommendation to not fund the Nurturing Center. And this is, I'm bringing y'all up to snuff so you can see where we are in our conversation. And that is also because this applicant does have a lot of costs associated with automobiles. And it's very concerning we had a lot of conversation around that. Just the percentage we're being charged, the grant is being charged 100% of the billing. However, it appears that these automobiles and these expenses are not just solely for this project. And so some shared costs. So those are that's where the conversation is. Just want to bring y'all up to date here. But if y'all real good at math and you're not as heartfelt with the pen and can help us through it, because this is where we can't give a recommendation to full council. I guess we can. I wouldn't like to full council with with no guidance to say, hey, we couldn't come up with nothing. So that's where we are in our thought process. Mr. Brandon. Branham, I'm sorry, I'm making the new name.
So ideally, we would need to find another $150,000 to reduce from the group.
It's actually a little lower. It's probably a little, I said 200,000, but what's the exact number, Miss Thomas? I think it might be 232 or something.
Are we speaking from Ms.
Yes.
Newton's motion? So
Yes,
Ms.
or Miss Newton.
My thought process, it would be $63,628.
That's what's left.
If you were to accept my suggestion that we fund senior resources at the one fiscal year amount, which is $548,046, probably, because I work with words, which would be the 1 year and not the 1.5 years. If we don't fund the nurturing center, that would take away from our overage $424,046, which would leave a balance of $63,628, which if you divide it by 2, would be about $31,000 from organizations. And I know Mr. Livingston wanted to say something.
Mr. Livingston, Ms. Mackey had her.
I'm sorry.
Ms. Mackey was next.
Thank you, Councilwoman Barron. I'm clear now because Ms. Newton walked through, but that's what I was going to ask is what was the exact amount? So I'm clear now where else, how much more we need to cut. Thank you.
Mr. Livingston.
When you gave me earlier that total amount that was remaining, so I didn't think the 548 that senior resources have already received that's considered not applicable, right? I mean, why?
That was a part of the budget motion that council made in FY23 was that those ARPA funds would reduce the allocation of $2 million for food insecurity.
Right, but why are we tying that into this, though? I don't understand how that relates to any of this.
We've backed it out already. So rather than having $2 million for food insecurity, you actually have $1,451,954.
So to that, Mr. Livingston, during our process, we were working on this process really along with the budget cycle last year, if I'm remembering correctly. And so we already had these categories outlined, and because we already had them outlined, we placed them here. And so now we're backing that amount out.
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir, Mr. Brown. I thought it was Jesus calling me for.
No, you did not. I don't know what he
need him
sounds
to-
like,
I
but
need him
I'm
to
pretty
speak.
sure.
I need him to speak to me.
What I will do is try to help you reconcile some thoughts that you shared consistently across multiple meetings. One of the things you talked about early on is that you wanted to give more consideration to organizations that had established processes or established programs. So if that's one of your considerations, if you feel like as you're trying to make a decision, there's certainly an organization on here, and I'm not going to call names, but I think you all have identified that is a experienced program versus a non-experienced program. And then there's been questions that you raised whenever it comes up whether or not you're concerned about funding an agency at all, you've kind of shied away from that. So in looking at that, your math adds up. So again, I'm not trying to make a decision for you. I'm just trying to remind you of things that you've consistently talked about. And if you consider those things, that puts you in a certain direction. But that I don't want to overspeak or overstep, but I just want to remind you of things that you've previously discussed about. So.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. And so you just kind of helped, thank you for the reminder, because you did help me tremendously. But I'll recognize Ms. Newton before I make a statement.
Oh, well, I'll wait then. I was going to make a motion.
Oh, make the motion.
As part of my motion, I would kindly request that somebody in administration has a calculator, just in case.
Just a second. Let me get my total numbers. Hang on. Y'all are giving me a workout today. Okay.
I move that we fund PALS at the full amount requested of $58,256. Oh, yes, ma'am, up to pending desk, let me start over. I move pending successful completion of a desk review that we fund the following organizations up to the amounts that I'm about to list. So for PALS, that would be $58,256. For senior resources, it would be $548,046. In other words, the one fiscal year as opposed to 1.5. For the Midlands Housing Alliance, $419,986. For Prisma Health, $348,000. I think $189. My handwriting is really not great right there. Greg's Groceries, $77,500.
We're off by $13.
Well,
No, we're off by a little bit more, $23.
then, hold on one second. Is this motion gonna get a second before I do this? Then with that in mind, you said we're off by $23?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Then I would adjust the Greg's Groceries to be $77,477.
Second. Discussion? Ms. Carrillo, please call the vote.
Brenham,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Ms. Barron, I appreciate how you recognize the need to move fast, because you felt how it's gonna, you almost
No,
lost one vote earlier.
We've already had much discussion on that, and I do hope that the people understand that we're just trying to do good. That's it, trying to do good. So our next category is workforce training. Ms. Newton has recused herself for this category. Mr. Branham and I will take it, but Ms. Thomas, we'll hear from you first.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Wait, I'm sorry, just a point of order. Mr. Wright, do I need to state my reason for recusal now on the record before we continue?
Of course, you have to fill out the form.
I will
Yes, you
indeed.
can state it.
Sure, if I may, I am recusing myself from this category because the Midlands Fatherhood Coalition is part of, I worked for the umbrella organization. They were a client of mine, and so I'm just recusing myself from this category because they're an applicant. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Newton.
Thank you. In workforce training, there was a total allocation of $1 million that was put aside for this category. We did nothing from the budget in FY23, so that leaves $1 million available. Qualified recommendations from our consultant is $1,471,111. On page 48 of your workbook, you can find those listed groups. One is the Alston Wilkes Society, nonprofits, Alston Wilkes Society Employment Supports for Former Offenders, $80,000. The USC Technology Incubator, for the USC Technology Incubator Workforce Development Accelerator. Midlands Fatherhood Coalition for the nonprofit workforce development to strengthen economically disadvantaged families for $50,000.
Okay.
The Richland County Public Library Workforce Digital Equity Program, $83,750. The Lower Richland Alumni Foundation for the Workforce Training Project of the Lower Richland Alumni Foundation, $101,961. National Federation of the Blind for South Carolina Successful Transitions for Synergy Success, $475,000. Again, as I said, that puts us $471,111 over the allocation. With regard to those people who have been awarded funds, the Alston Wilkes Foundation, the Alton Wilkes Society has been awarded funds. The Richland County Public Library has been awarded in one category and recommended to move forward to full council in two categories. The Lower Richland Alumni Foundation is recommended to be moved forward in another category, and that is my synopsis.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. So I'll open up for discussion at this point from any of the committee or council members that are present. Mr. Brandon, you have any food for thought starting?
Not at the moment. I want to see if any other council members that are present have any discussion.
That's so nice of you. You know, I'm not even on this committee, but thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts. Hearing what ACA Thomas mentioned of others being awarded, and knowing that we have to reduce, just looking at it overall, I would, just saying based off kind of scores and dollars amount, I think the top 4 are very good ones that are listed and have some good programs. So that would be my thoughts without going over the dollar amount.
And when you say the top 4, you mean the
Sorry.
top 4 scoring?
Yes,
highest
scoring. Yes, thank you. So Alston Wilkes, USC Columbia Technology Incubator, Midlands Fatherhood Coalition, and the Richland County Library.
Okay. Noted. And so some of my thoughts, I do agree with you, Ms. Mackey, that definitely, I was sharing with someone that in the grant world that I came from, if you scored less than an 80, you didn't get funded. And then the educator in me says that less than an 80, you need a little more study time. But, that's not where we are. But I'm comfortable with the applicants that have been listed here. And we've got some great notes from our third party that makes me feel even more so comfortable about it. I would like to even just lend, Ms. Thomas, if you could help us with the math. And that is if we take the $471,111.25 and divide it amongst 6, what would be the deduction there?
$78,518.54. 55 cents.
Thoughts, Mr. Brandon?
Could we get the proportion of each applicant as they relate to the total amount requested of all applicants?
Okay. Yes, sir.
Percentage.
It'll take a little math. Of the total or of the overage?
Of the total.
Okay. The Alston Wilkes Foundation represents 5.44%. I do ask that you guys sort of keep notes on this because the USC Columbia Technology Incubator represents 46.3%. The Midlands Fatherhood Coalition represents 3.4%. The Lower Richland the Richland County Public Library represents 5.7%. The Lower Richland Alumni Association represents 6.93%. And the National Federation of the Blind of South Carolina Successful Transitions represents 32.3%.
And could we get the 471, 111, 25, and just multiply out these percentages so we know?
Okay, can you tell me what, if I may, I need to ask for some help. If you can remind me the percentage of Alston Wilkes.
Alston,
5.44.
Okay, that would be 25,000, no, I'm sorry, 5.44, $2,563. Madam Clerk, the USC Technology Incubator.
$46.3.
Okay. $218,125.
One more time, Ms. Thomas.
$218,125, and for simplicity, I'm rounding.
All right, so we're doing Midlands Fatherhood Coalition now? No, you were doing, which one is next?
Midlands Fatherhood Coalition.
Okay, so that was 3.4% if you're rounding.
$16,018. No, I'm sorry. That's incorrect. $3.4%?
Yes, ma'am.
$1,700.
And then the next one, Richland Public Library was I'm rounding 5.7%.
$4,774. I'm sorry.
$774.
Yes, sorry, I'd already cleared it for the next one.
The next one was 6.9%.
$7,035. Last one?
The last one is 32.3%.
$153,425. If this is the direction of the motion, just so that we make sure that we have all the numbers absolutely right, because we are working on the fly here, it would be my preference as a financial person to ask that they be applied in proportion of their allocation of the request.
We get just a quick question. Request for the information. What are we getting at? We're trying to proportionally just reduce them all?
yes. In the proportion of the original amount requested.
With that, but I just think when you got organizations, you got the consultants saying this is such a great project, particularly when they're talking about the incubator, and you already have Lower Richland and the library already been funded and so forth, and then I'm gonna take that away from a great project just doesn't make sense to me. So I think we ought to, get rid of something as opposed to just taking something away that folks say are great.
Ms. Mackey?
Thank you. My comments were on the same lines as that. Understanding if that is the intent of the request information, I do feel like we put out an application. Folks submitted an application, scored very high, 87 and 80, even looking at the top two, and they asked for these dollars amount. And I don't see at this point why we would reduce from someone that has submitted a good application. If we're wanting to see the true impact and results, why wouldn't we award the full request? And so I guess I wouldn't see the need to reduce versus just not award for the others, which is why I was looking at suggesting the top four, and that still keeps us under the full amount in the category and giving them what they requested to deliver on a program that they put in the application.
So to that point, Ms. Mackey, I hear you, but we just spent about 45 minutes having a conversation, and we reduced budget. We reduced a budget significantly. Who was the number one highest scoring applicant for consistency?
And I know that. For that last category, I came in late, and I thought it would be rude for me to chime in, so I kept quiet. So I did not agree with the last category, but because I came late to the meeting, I didn't find it appropriate for me to now chime in on a discussion that you all have been having for over an hour, and I was late. But I did not agree with that approach there either. But now that I'm here for this full discussion, I wanted to just say it for the record.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any further discussion and/or a motion? I'll make a motion. I'll make a motion, and I hear it, and council has the full autonomy to have another conversation about it once we make the recommendation to full council. But I'm going to do my best to use the language that was provided. So I'd like to make a motion to reduce each applicant's requested amount in proportion with the allocation that was requested, and that would be specifically to Austin Wilkes Society, USC Columbia Technology Incubator, Midlands Fatherhood Coalition, Richland County Public Library, Lower Richland Alumni Foundation, the National Federation of the Blind of South Carolina, Successful Transitions.
Second.
And so for discussion, Ms. Thomas, I just want to make sure that I got your language correct.
Yes, ma'am. And thanks to my staff, I actually have the numbers here.
Any further discussion? If not, Ms. Carrillo, please call for the vote.
Brenham,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
motion approved.
Thank you. So this is, at this point, we have awarded all categories with the exception of the small business, as well as we did set aside the youth services. But I want to just make sure that as we move forward, we will be setting a date for a meeting to have some conversation around how we need to move forward with the small business category. That was a category that was, we received a lot of applications for way past what we had set aside. And so we want to make sure that we really just kind of dig deep into having a conversation as to how we want to proceed with that. Again, thank you so much, Ms. Thomas, for your hard work on this process. Our next order of business is 4B, which is staff updates on desk reviews. Mr. Brown, do you all have any updates on any of our desk reviews at the time? I know Ms. Thomas briefly mentioned earlier. If there's anything else to share?
No, nothing other than what was shared earlier about the receipt of those desk reviews that we have already gotten back.
And so our next order of business is adjournment.
Second.
Ms. Carrillo?
Brenham,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes?
Newton.
Yes?
Motion approved.
Thank you. We're adjourned.